Thanks so much for tuning back in to Tech Tuesday. I'm your host, Jordan Evans. Today, we're talking about a topic that I just love talking about, and I particularly love talking about right now as I have the privilege of being in the W. Lawson Longevity and Inclusion Alliance and learning all about longevity and inclusion and DEI and these awesome topics with some amazing leaders in aging services. I got the chance to meet Nathalya Ramírez of early intervention systems at the longevity and inclusion retreat. And so I couldn't think of a better person to bring on to talk about this topic. So we're going to dig in, but before we do, let's run that intro. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on to the show. I'm happy to have you. Good to see you again.
Likewise. Hello, everyone.
So you work with a company called Early Intervention Systems. Briefly, tell us about Early Intervention Systems.
Thank you. Yes, Early Intervention Systems, EIS for short, is a communication platform for the caregiving teams in senior living communities and healthcare facilities that bridge the communication gaps that exist today in senior living and healthcare to reduce burden in terms of who did what, who didn't do what in between shifts, and most importantly, to create a space for caregivers, nurses, and senior living staff to voice their opinions as an internal communication tool for your community. So, speaking of DEI, there's a lot with that topic that we really focus on EIS. So, we want to be the first culturally inclusive communication platform in the senior living industry.
So true, as we've learned. And let's briefly, before we jump into that, let's briefly talk about the Longevity Inclusion Alliance. And it's been transformative being in it myself. And I'm sure it was for you. I do want to talk about all of the work that you're doing for frontline caregivers and understanding. But briefly, Marvell Adams Jr., Sarah Moore, amazing team. The website is wlawsoncompany.com/fellows. They're doing amazing work. Tell me about what it was like for you.
Yes, for me, when I first saw this, I was a little skeptic. I just a little bit of background. I was born and raised in Bogota, Colombia. I came to the United States when I was 13. I didn't know English, so I was placed into the English as a second language program in my high school. So, as an immigrant, as a non-native English speaker who kind of had to work her way through high school, then college with an accent, I was very drawn by how much people looked at me because of the way I talked, as opposed to the content or the quality of the content that I was bringing to the table. Then I became a high school teacher, and I was with a very diverse group of students, and they weren't looking at me about my accent or the way that I was talking, but rather the content that I was delivering. So I started asking myself questions like, why is it that when I'm sitting down in certain rooms with people, they look at me because of the way I speak, but when I'm in diverse groups, I just feel like I can be myself. I'm less intimidated, and I'm able to deliver the content like a breeze. So all these questions, as I just firsthand experience, really kind of got me into diversity and inclusion myself, and especially going to a university that started promoting their DI efforts because it was predominantly white and privileged and female oriented. So because of all these transitions, when I came into the senior living industry as a vendor, and I started seeing that there was lack of representation of diversity leadership teams, but the opposite, the workforce was very diverse, I was like, wait a second, what's going on here? So that's when my co-founder, Christian Shah, he was like, hey, I saw this program, I think you'd be a great fit. why don't you apply? And I'm like, is it one of those DEI programs where people are just like throwing the DEI word over there that it's just an acronym, like it doesn't mean much? So I did tell Marvel like 3 months later, crying, like, this is what I was thinking, and this is how I'm walking today out of this program. But just to highlight both their efforts, like 2 words that come to my mind are compassion and empathy, which are like the highlight of the program for me. And I'll let you ask more about it. But in a nutshell, I came in very skeptic, not knowing that we could work with diversity in the senior living industry. And I walked out with hope that we can actually build diverse cultures within our senior living communities.
That's I'm like tearing up thinking. I mean, that's been my similar experience. I love that it's been the same experience for you. Like, we've just learned so much through everyone else's stories, and I just love the you're right, empathy and compassion has just been the themes of even just having empathy and compassion from the moderators or the educators, being Sarah and Marvell, but also everyone just has come in with this open heart, and it's been amazing to just share our stories. Tell me, do you feel like you've taken things that you've learned and really moved it in and really moved the needle about what you knew about DEI?
I definitely did. For me, it's been a process itself, just recognizing who I am in the senior living industry. Just another background piece. I was a biophysics undergraduate. I was just looking at data. I was trying to do research in healthcare. And then I stumbled across memory care facilities and agitation outbreaks and a lot of like non-clinical and clinical interventions. And from just shadowing all the senior living staff, I was like, this is beyond data, right? I love data. I'm a technical person. I'm a very logical driven person. But it just came down to like sitting down and just being like, hey, how was your day today, right? Like, I see that you're like really upset about this, but it's not the residents' fault. So tell me more about it, right? And then we just chat for hours. And then I'm like, wait, but that can actually feed into my data. That can actually like create a story that we're missing from that data piece. And so that kind of had to do more with like human dynamics. And again, once going through this program, I just really kind of honing on the vision. At least for my company, we do tech, but there's so many companies that are doing the same thing, right? Like, how do we differentiate ourselves? That's something that vendors are constantly talking and wondering amongst themselves. But for me, it was like an eye-opening experience, this 3-month program, or the duration of the program, to really recognize beyond, like, I'm just not offering a technology service. This is a technology that is used by people, and people have emotions, and they have things that happen day to day. And if I can explain that through the data, then I got it. But most importantly, if they're happy when they go home after their shift, because they did something good for themselves today, not just to increase compliance rates, not just to please their boss. If they're happy with like the work that they did throughout their shift and they go home at peace, that's a win for me.
Part of getting those wins is understanding that the people doing the work, you get to see the rainbow. I mean, you could go and build programs that are colorblind, but then you miss the beautiful parts of the rainbow and the different aspects of a person, beyond just their role. Let's pivot a little bit, and just to add in that one more time, wlawsoncompany.com/fellows. Check that out. It's right there. Pivoting quickly, you told me, you mentioned how important it is to represent the people that are serving and being inclusive. When I came in as a senior living vendor, and when you came in, I'm sure you saw all of the faces that looked all the same. And we serve organizations that have DEI programs, that have diversity in their mission, because they realize and recognize that not only are we serving a population of older people that will increasingly get more diverse. But we also serve a workforce that is diverse. And so we have like lots of senior living organizations have it in their mission to be more, to build more leadership and have those leadership programs that are more diverse. And then you look at the industry that serves those organizations, and there's not that same push. How important, you mentioned it again, but I'd love to go into deeper, how important, now you have a very diverse leadership team between the three of you, but how important do you find it in, as you grow, making sure that diversity and inclusion and creating a sense of belonging, as well as creating equitable programs, is important to your future?
For me as a vendor, it's extremely important that I gather myself, and as a leader, more importantly, I'm co-founder, I'm CEO, and it's important for me that my first hires, that's something that I always talk to my co-founders about. We have to make sure that we get to know the people that we're going to work with, and that doesn't just mean like, oh, can they sell into senior living, because that's what some of our investors would say, like, oh, how many like dollars have they generated for other senior living companies before. But I'm like, well, that's important. I do believe that if my vision within my company is to foster culturally appropriate like environments for our caregivers, I have to create the same environment in my company. So I focus on that a lot when I interview people, even if it's just like someone part-time or a contractor or a third-party like agent, or even with my partnerships, like who am I going to start having partnerships with? That's important for me because I want them to have perspective, and diversity for me means perspective. I always say this, and this is a little bit unrelated, but two advice that I could give to anybody is like live by yourself and travel. And so obviously live by yourself is a personal journey where you learn a lot about yourself, but traveling gives you perspective. Like you learn a lot, and it's not just like vacationing, like, sipping on a mocktail cocktail like by the beach. It doesn't mean that. It means like get to know the culture, and you don't have to go far to do that. Like there's within cities or towns, there's small communities that are diverse. So maybe go try out that restaurant, like maybe go and support that local business and see how they interact. Like you don't have to go far to travel. But that gives you perspective. And so how I kind of translate that back into my company, for example, or the people that I'm having businesses with or having partnerships with, is I want them to have that perspective of like, hey, I come from this background. Because there's so many times on a daily basis that I disagree with Christian or my other co-founder, but that's for the better of the company, but because they bring their own perspective from their own background. Like, whereas for me, I'm like, if I just had Colombian people all around me, I'd be like happy because it's my people, right? But then how much more am I growing from that? And so that's something that I really encourage everyone to do. But as a vendor, that's the approach I've taken, is I embrace it and I do it. I don't just say that I'm going to do it. I do it.
So often you'll see someone on the floor in a community, but I mean, to take a step back, I mean, this is an ecosystem. Every industry is an ecosystem. And so the floor of a community is one part of that ecosystem. Going to a conference is one part of the ecosystem. You can travel within your industry, traveling, going to a different community and going and walking the floor, going to a conference in different spaces. It's all an ecosystem, but the idea of being a traveler and not a tourist is so important. You can go to a community and drop off donuts and, give and gab with the DON, but that's not immersing yourself in and learning those stories that makes up that community. That's being a tourist. And so I've often played with this idea of like, and I've heard other people discuss it, being a traveler, you can travel, but traveling and being a tourist is sitting on the side drinking a mocktail or just pulling out the pieces for you, pulling out the pieces of an experience that you want to experience. But being a traveler is fully immersing yourself and just letting letting whatever the space has to give you, taking it on with no expectation.
Absolutely. And I think that I've been blessed to visit countries that I'd never expected to visit. That now, like 10 years later after those visits, I'm like, wow, I can work with the caregivers because I understand, I've been to their countries, understand how they interact with each other. And I even say words in their language and they're like, they look at me like, oh my God, like what? And so it like breaks the ice even faster. Like they just see me as a person, not as the person that comes in and installs some tech piece, because I'm like you said, I'm right there with them. I'm not a tourist. I'm not just the person that comes and trains them, because a lot of times they're like, oh my God, is this person with the iPad again? You know, it's like, it's not like that. It's supposed to be building that relationship with them. And one thing that I am proud of is one of our customers, St. John's Senior Services. We've had such an amazing experience exploring this because their executive administrator, her name is Christine Kaplan. I'm giving her a shout out here too. But she actually embraces diversity in such a particular way that starts with active listening. And that's another form of becoming a traveler. It's like she can go down the hall and ask them how their day was, right? Like, how was your day off yesterday? And they'd be saying like, oh, it was my son's birthday. And in my culture, we have this tradition and we did this. And she's open to listen to them. And so that's something that it oftentimes it gets overlooked. Again, it's free. It doesn't cost more than 2 minutes for you to just check in on someone, to listen where they're coming from, to listen how their day-to-day is going, and understand that, hey, yes, I may not have the life that they have, but this is the people who I'm working with. And next time something happens, she's like, oh, this is how she thinks. This is how this caregiver is approaching this scenario based on how she was, you know, like raised, or how she believes that things work. And so it has improved, for example, like quality assurance meetings where they're like, they need to make decisions about, oh, okay, this staff member or this resident. They're like, maybe we shouldn't pair this resident with this because of the cultural differences, or maybe we should improve this or foster this environment because we see a lack of representation in this area. So just having those open conversations about it, even when you don't know it, and asking questions, but most importantly, starting with listening to your own staff is like another way to become a traveler within your own community.
That is that's some solid advice. I love that. That is, don't be a traveler within your community, but actively listening and meeting people where they are. That is, wow. How we build this for our vendors, and I say this all the time, is we need to hold them accountable. And so just like you have partners that are praising you and saying, you're doing great, I love that you're doing this, I love that you're doing this, to making sure that there's more representation and diversity, you're doing this, and making sure that that when you come to our community, you're creating a sense of belonging. Like, these are, I think that I've said this often, we should have programs in place, like I think about Girls That Code, or Girls in Tech, the nonprofit organization. We can build our own tech or senior living tech industry from the CNAs and the housekeeping people, the frontline staff that are in our communities, if we invest in them. And I would love to see that, where we are building our own pipeline for our vendors, sales teams, or their account teams, or even their IT teams.
I think as a vendor, it's important for you to ask these questions in your sales process, because like I said, for training purposes, we see a lot of non-compliance with technology systems. And then a year or two later, when they are doing procurement, they realize that they're not getting the most out of that technology system, which it may be a good product. It may actually do what it's supposed to do. But because of the lack of all these missing pieces, some of them related to diversity, some of them related to like accountability purposes or compliance rates. But where does compliance come from? From the user. And who is the user? The diverse workforce. So what are you doing to support diverse workforce on the day-to-day? And that's an issue we're seeing right now, where we are seeing that more important than our technology, which is the communication platform for them to have seamless shift transitions, we're seeing an increase of a service that has to do more with like the support on day-to-day. It's like we're going back and saying this caregiver can do more. She's not utilizing the system to the max. But here's how that caregiver can maximize the use of it by educating her how to communicate better. And a lot of administrators, unfortunately, are fearful. They're like, because they don't understand where they come from. They're like, oh, they're so highly uneducated. We hear that all the time. Or they're not professional. They don't know how to talk. And I'm like, but lead by example then. Communicate better and show them how to communicate better. But here's how we are doing to support you. We're creating training manuals. We're creating automated, like, through AI, which is your buzzword of 2024. But through all those interventions, we can support your caregivers so that your fear of, hey, let's not have them document this because they don't know how to say it. It's like, no, let's give them the tools to empower them to do so because they're capable of. But you just have to be a little bit open-minded. You have to trust the process, and you yourself have to lead them. Like you say, you have to keep support in the leadership. And what a better way than like bringing in more diverse people that look like them, that can tell them, hey, but also to onboard vendors who are on that mission. So I think it's a collaborative effort for sure, and it's only the beginning. It's a process.
How do you start though? I mean, I'm thinking I'm in this place where I want to find more mission aligned, especially when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion and creating a sense of belonging. I want to find mission aligned vendors. How do I find that? Like, how do I weed through all the likenesses and find organizations that are aligned?
Some organizations have been, I guess, taking a step beyond, like gone the mile ahead and started their own program and actually have allocated resources towards DEI, and they've been successful either through immigration programs, either through training from like ESL, to getting them into community college, to getting them like certified as RNs or CNAs or whatever they may want, and then implementing like an internship like program into their organization. So kudos to those organizations because they are doing what's right, but most importantly, they're innovative in that area. I could tell you, hey, like if you're a senior living leader, then you should definitely implement like some best practices that your leadership can kind of follow on and like kind of transfer it like a domino effect onto the VPs, and then the VPs to the executive directors and so on. But that's kind of like what every vendor does, right? It's like they kind of get to the owner, then they try to get to each facility, and hopefully it works. But we know like diversity, like equity and inclusion is not like a cookie cutter thing that you can just implement and like release and that's it. I think it's the opposite. It takes time because it's bottom up. It starts with you. So one way to start is start by looking at yourself and how you are interacting with people that don't look like you, that don't speak like you, that don't come from where you are. And that doesn't just mean when you go to work at your senior living community. It means in your own family, in your own personal day-to-day, like when you go to the grocery store. Like it starts there, but then when you get to your communities, how can you replicate it there? What can you start? Active listening, like I was mentioning. You don't have to implement a band standard for this. You can just start practicing this. Empathy, it's another way. It's like if a caregiver is like, struggling, they can't come like for the shift, whatever. It's like try to find out why and try to find out if this is something that's an ongoing issue, because then it can also prepare you for hiring a, agency that can bring you like, help and support for when these issues arise. So I think it starts home, like to kind of say the least, but there's ways that you can do, and it's through partnerships. Like make sure that you are partnering with people that have mission, and make sure that if yours is lacking a mission, to start thinking about how you want your community to look like in 5 years. Because a lot of people just go reactive, but they don't go like, okay, this is where I want to go, and these are the small steps that I'm taking towards being the first senior living community that has onboarded, I don't know, like two like Afro Latino, not to like put a label or like a tag on something, but to have actionable and attainable goals for your community. And because at least that's what I do as a vendor for my company.
And I think it's important to kind of put it on the community of how do you find the right partners? How do you find the right organizations that are aligned, and also finding leadership that are, start in those sales calls with not just the problem you're looking to solve, but also who you are as an organization, and asking the question of, well, who are you as an organization? I know you sell a product, like plenty of your competitors sell a product too. Not only what differentiates you in the product that you sell, but who are you as an organization, and making sure that you're bringing in good company, that you're bringing in people that are dedicated to moving your mission forward, not only just like servicing you and the product that they solve. It's so crazy. Time has already come. Let's do the wrap up. What are 3 things that you wanna kind of part with?
Oof, I think one literally just came to mind. It's just an actionable item that's as simple as familiarize yourself with definitions. What is diversity, right? Like, what is equity? What is inclusion? And what are some examples of that? Because I've had communities that are like, oh, we don't need this because we speak English. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not what diversity is. And so I'm like baffled about like, yeah, it's 2024. You have like operate this many communities and you don't know what a diverse team looks like. So again, not to put anybody right there on the spot, but it's like it gives us an opportunity for us to learn. So I would say educate yourself on what DEI efforts are and how you can implement them in your community. I think as a vendor is important, again, to when you have your sales process, to learn about the dynamics of the not just the C-suite, but also the employees, like what's the ratio, like the demographics, where are they located, like demographically, because all of this helps you understand like cultural, like from state to state differences, especially as you kind of land and expand your solution. And I guess the third and most important is just like we said it, that resonated with me, is become a traveler. It's just, you just have to, because people will see you as a person, not as the boss, not as the tourist, not as the person who's reinforcing things to hold them accountable for something, but as a person that's like getting on their level. Serve them so they can serve your residents and the rest of the employees better. So yeah.
This has been another episode of Tech Tuesday, where we don't talk about tech, we talk about everything around tech, and all of the awesome things that tech can do to ensure that we can better serve residents, staff can better serve residents, that we can better serve staff, and that we continue to build awesome communities that are senior living communities. This is Tech Tuesday. I'm your host, Jordan Evans. This is here every Tuesday at 1:30. If you have some future content, some future ideas, or you just want to say hi, my email is there, and I'll see you next Tuesday.